If you have your Bibles, would you please open with me to John chapter 8. John chapter 8. You might be kind of thinking, well, Sam, we didn't do John chapter 7. Well, that's fine. I'm okay moving on past John chapter 7 to John chapter 8. I'm trying to hit the main stories in the Gospel of John. And there will be some times that we get kind of down into some of the weeds. I hope that you are reading all of these chapters and kind of staying tuned in to what we're doing here in the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John chapter 7, however, there's just a few things that do happen that are important to us, the most important of which is there is increasing controversy over Jesus and his identity and his teaching. Jesus makes it very clear that what he is teaching is what he receives from the Father, and he only speaks what the Father gives him to speak, and that his people are his people. And so there's this growing division over who Jesus is. People who were commissioned to take Jesus captive refused to do so because they were a little bit more convinced that he didn't need capturing at the time. And so there's a lot going on in chapter 7, but it leads us to this chapter 8 where we have a story of someone who has been caught in the act. And so I thought I would start with a story of a time when I actually got caught in the act doing something that was embarrassing. So what happened was I was 20 years old. I was working at a company in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and my youngest sister, Annie, had gotten into the music of the day, the hip-hop and rap scene of the day, and I wasn't into that at all. But there was a song back in those days that you might remember called Can't Touch This. Does anybody remember that? Raise your hand about this high, don't admit it. Okay. MC Hammer, right? And so I thought it would be funny to convince my youngest sister that I had gotten into that kind of music, which I hadn't. But I was listening to this song over and over and over, and then one day, on my lunch break, when I thought no one else was around or looking in the back of the warehouse, I thought I would put together a dance routine, and I'd memorized all the lyrics to the song, and so I had my radio up in my car out behind the warehouse, and I am going through, can you imagine this? Okay, I'm dancing, trying to mimic MC Hammer's movements, which wasn't going well. And some of you can see me doing that. Yeah, I'm not going to show you any moves. I have no more moves. In fact, I don't teach that dancing is a sin, but it is wrong when I do it. You do not want to see me dance. But anyway, I'm back there and I'm busting a move, right? I think I'm doing something pretty cool here, and I'm rapping, like I'm doing all the lyrics, and I hear something. And the entire office staff and all the warehouse people that had gone on break had come out of the break room and there's like 9 people standing there watching me do this. And I was very humiliated in that moment, as you might expect. Have you ever been caught in the act, right? You ever been caught in a moment where you were embarrassed about something? And so anyway, I did do that for my sister, and she thought it was hilarious, and she didn't believe that I was into it. But anyway, it was so fun to try. How do you feel when you're caught in a sin? How do you feel when you are caught in a sin? Maybe you might feel like you can't get out of it. Maybe you feel like it's something that's so overwhelming that it's trapped you, and you feel like you can't get out of it no matter what you do, and no matter what you think, or no matter who you talk to, you seem to be overwhelmed by it. That's a real thing, right? Sometimes we get caught in a sin and we feel like we're trapped and like we're suffocating underneath a sin. And sometimes when you're caught in a sin, you don't want to get out. If I'm being completely honest, I think a lot of us feel that way. There's a sin that you have in your life that you like, and you want to keep it, and you continue to engage in that sin over and over again because it's something that you want to do. And as much as the one part of you, the flesh, wants to do that, there's still maybe a part of you, the spiritual side of you, that wants to get out of that sin. And Paul describes that when he writes about this in Romans chapter 7 as the struggle between the spirit and the flesh. That there's something I'm doing in the flesh that I really want to do, but in my spirit I really don't want to do that. And I think it's a fair thing to acknowledge that there are things that I really want to do, that I continue to do, that I know are against God's will. And there's a spirit of me that's struggling against it. And sometimes I don't want to let it go. Sometimes I want to cling to my sin more than I want to cling to Jesus. And that's a very serious problem. I'm going to tell you another story. There was a guy back in Michigan, in northern Michigan, preached for a little church in Mayo, Michigan. Population like 76 or something. I see David smiling. He's like, I know where Mayo, Michigan is. We have some Michiganders here today, and that would be people from Michigan if you didn't catch the reference. And so anyway, this guy was preaching up in Mayo, Michigan, and he had a habit every Sunday morning. Like if you didn't come to Bible class, if you didn't come to Wednesday night service, you know what he would do on Sunday morning? At the beginning of his sermon, he would point that out to the congregation. He would go down the list and say, I noticed that brother or sister such and such, you weren't here on Wednesday. Where were you? And he would wait for you to explain why you weren't at church on Wednesday or why you weren't at Bible class on Sunday morning. How does it feel to have a transgression exposed? How would you feel about that? You know, I have one of the privileges as a minister of knowing a lot of your lives well enough to know what your sins are. So I thought of what I might do this morning is maybe just expose a few of you. You're laughing because, is that nervous laughter? Or is that he's not really going to do that laughter? Because he's not really going to do that. But how would you feel if someone just stood you up in front of the whole church and said, by the way, your sin is this. Everybody look at this. How would you feel about that? Wouldn't it feel pretty awful, right? That would probably be the last Sunday that you went to that church, is what I'm going to guess is what we would do. So how does it feel to be called out and thrown in front of everybody in full view with your sin and nothing else to hide behind? It feels pretty awful, doesn't it? Well, that's what some people did to a woman in John chapter 8. And just one little note that I want to make about this particular text. In original manuscripts, the earliest dated manuscripts that we have, it's not part of the gospel. You'll notice that in your Bible there's a little footnote off to the side there that says earliest manuscripts don't contain this. Almost all of the later manuscripts do contain this, and so we're a little uncertain. Was this original to John? Was it something that was a part of one of the other gospels? Someone surmised maybe it was in Luke, and somehow it got transcribed over into John. I'm going to say it this way, I don't really think it matters. I believe myself that it was a part of the original text. It flows very well with the entire overall arcing view of what John is doing. Everything seems to line up for me on this, so I have no hesitation in teaching this as authoritative, as a genuine story. Fair enough? Okay, that's where I'm at. If you're not with me on that, argue with me later. But I think this is a legit story, and it's a story where Jesus encounters another person. And what you want to notice about John is that John is recording these stories. In fact, he says at the very end of the gospel that all these things have been written. This is in John chapter 20. He says, so that you might believe, right? That you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And so as you read these stories, there's something that should be kind of building up inside of you as you start to become more and more convinced that Jesus is exactly who he claimed to be and who he proved to be throughout the gospel. And so whether it's the disciples he's dealing with in John chapter 1, or it's the people at the wedding feast in John chapter 2, or it's Nicodemus in John chapter 3, or the woman at the well, or the Pharisees and the scribes and the opponents, or a person that was lame and was sitting outside of a pool, and Jesus says, get up and walk, and he gets up and walks. All of these stories are supposed to call to our attention that Jesus is exactly who he claims to be and who John claims for him to be from the very beginning of this gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And the rest of the story is John trying to show us what that really looks like. And so when we get to this John chapter 8, we're just going to look at 11 verses this morning. And we're going to do it from three perspectives. And as you're reading through this with me, I'm just going to read the narrative. I'm going to probably stop and say a few things along the way. I'll definitely do that. But there's three perspectives. There's the perspective of the people that want to put Jesus to the test, okay, that have brought this whole situation on. There's the perspective of the woman that's caught in adultery and thrown in front of Jesus. And then there is, of course, the perspective of Jesus himself, okay? So as you're looking through this, one of the things that I try to do, maybe you could do this also, is you could try to put yourselves into the sandals of the people there, so to speak, kind of enter into, what if you were trying to put Jesus to the test? What would it be like? Have you ever put Jesus to the test? Maybe you're like one of those folks there. Or maybe you've been exposed for something you're doing and you've been thrown in front of people and you're humiliated and shamed in that moment. Maybe you stand in those sandals for a moment so you can start to begin to feel like what that really feels like. Or maybe you can learn from Jesus. It'd be pretty hard to stand in his sandals, but I would say that you can learn from Jesus as to how God expects us and how God actually responds to people who are thrown in front of him who have been caught in a sin. Okay, got that? Let's read this together. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him. Notice all the people are coming to him in John chapter 6. You got all these people that are coming to him. He feeds the 5,000. Large crowds of people have caught Jesus. He has caught their attention. This is all the people were coming to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and Pharisees, and we have described them as the opponents of Jesus. These are the religious elite people, the most pious religious people in those moments, right? And yet they are the ones that are most adamantly opposed to Jesus and most threatened by him. So the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act." Okay? So we have people here, and they want to put Jesus to the test. They want to try to trip Jesus up. And you might be wondering to yourself, you should be wondering to yourself, how is it that this is going to throw Jesus a curveball? How is this going to throw Jesus off? And perhaps it would be important for you to know that in those days, in the first century, the Jewish leaders did not have the right to pronounce a judgment on someone that would lead to execution. The Jewish people did not have that right. That had been taken away from them because they'd been overtaken by another group of people called the Romans, right? And the Romans alone had the authority to put someone to death. Now, we've already heard this a few times in the last couple of chapters, but the Pharisees and the scribes, they want to see Jesus put to death. As he teaches more, as he heals people, as he does these miraculous things, they want to get rid of him. They want to get rid of him completely. And so they were seeking a way to kill him, and one of the ways they could get him killed would be if he could pronounce a judgment against this woman and say to them, "Take these stones and stone her to death," what would happen? Well, that she would be stoned to death, but then they could also report him to the Roman authorities, who would in turn kill him. They're trying to get Jesus killed, right? Now, what happens if he doesn't go along with their plan? Well, it looks like he's going against Moses, and so it would then turn them against him even more. And so they're trying to set a trap for Jesus. Does that make sense to you? They do not want Jesus to continue on teaching and preaching and healing and doing miracles, because the more of that he does, the more obvious it is that he's the Messiah, and the more people will follow him, which means for them, fewer people will follow after their teaching. And so this woman is thrown before him, caught in the very act. And they say this in verse 5, "Now in the law Moses commanded us to stone such women. What then do you say?" Now what you might want to do while I'm talking here for a minute is go back and read Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10. The Mosaical law does command for people to be stoned caught in the very act of adultery. What did they not mention? Well, it's interesting that they mentioned that they commanded to kill such women like this. But if you read Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, it also means men that were caught in the act. Do you suppose they're leaving something out here? Do you suppose they're just kind of throwing together a plan, trying to trip Jesus up? Why didn't they bring the man along? Why didn't they throw him out there with her? Because as we know, it takes two to tango, so to speak, right? And so we have this woman that's thrown out in front of him, and they're testing him that you're supposed to stone such women and kill them. And they were saying this, it says, testing them so they might have grounds for accusing him, saying that he doesn't follow the law of Moses. But Jesus stooped down with his finger and wrote on the ground. Aren't you curious? Aren't you a little bit curious? What did Jesus write on the ground? I don't know. There's been a lot of things suggested. Some people have suggested that maybe he was just kind of maybe drawing some shapes or something like that to draw attention away from the woman who's been taken and thrown in front of them and humiliated and shamed. Maybe that's what he's doing. Maybe he's making a list of names in that dirt of the people that are standing there with rocks and writing what their sins are. Maybe that's what he's doing. I don't know. Nobody knows. But Jesus is taking the attention away from them, and he's not saying anything. He just stoops down on the ground, and he begins to write in the sand. It says in verse 7, "But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up," he stood back up, "and said to them, 'He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her.'" Okay. So if anyone here doesn't have any sin, you can just take that rock that you're holding in your hand right now, and you can go ahead and throw it anytime you would like, right? Does that sound like anything else Jesus might have taught? Remember in Matthew in the sermon, he speaks about this, and he says that you got to be careful about judging others, because it just might be that while you're trying to pick the speck out of someone else's eye, what might be going on with your eye? You remember what he said? There might be a log hanging out of your eye. And I think Jesus meant to be a bit humorous. If you were to look at that in a cartoon, you got a guy that's there with a log out of his eye, and he's smacking this guy in the head while he's trying to look at the speck that's in his eye. And he says that what you need to do first, before you try to take the speck out of someone else's eye, is you need to look at what's stuck in your own eye, right? And then remove that, and then you could actually be helpful in helping that other person. And Jesus is drawing upon that teaching that before they judge her and condemn her to death, they need to look back at themselves. Have they lived perfect lives? Have they sinned before God? Which one of them shouldn't be thrown in front of Jesus in that very moment? And so, let he was without sin throw the first stone. And so what's he do? He goes right back to the ground. He stoops back down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one. It's like they got the message, right? And they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and he was left alone, and the woman where she was, in the center of the court. Wow. So everybody has left the room, right? Everybody heard what Jesus had to say, and from the oldest to the youngest, they dropped the rocks, and they began walking out of the temple court there and moving on their way. They hadn't been able to trap Jesus, but there's still a problem. This woman has been caught legitimately in the act of adultery. She has been sinning and been caught and been thrown in front of Jesus, who is God in the flesh. How does God in the flesh react to a person that's caught up in a sin? By the way, this woman didn't come to him voluntarily. Did you notice that? She wasn't taken and said, sure, I volunteer. I'll just go right in there in front of Jesus. You can throw me on the ground and embarrass me. She was taken and thrown in front of Jesus, in front of all these people. And now it's just Jesus standing there with this woman. What do you suppose you would be expecting? If you were in her position, what would you be expecting Jesus to say? This guy who's a teacher, this guy who's a healer, this guy who people are following, right? You know, the people are starting to pick up this might be the Messiah. They're starting to understand who he is. What would the Messiah say to you in that situation? You've heard me talk about this before, and when I say what's the face that you see on God, if he were to look at you, if you were to imagine what the face of Jesus was in that moment, would it be a look of disappointment? Would it be a look of ridicule? Would it be a look of condemnation? What would that look like? What do you expect Jesus to look at you, and what kind of facial expression would he have in that moment? Well, I don't know what his face looked like in that moment, but I know what his words are, and this is what he says. Straightening up. He comes back up from the ground. He's been down there writing on the ground. Jesus said to her, woman, and we've said this before, but the term woman here is not derogatory. It's a respectful way of speaking to someone. Jesus speaks to her with respect. Says, woman, where are they? Look around. Everybody that drug you in here, where did they go? Where are they? Did no one condemn you? Wasn't there anyone here in the crowd? Wasn't there anyone in the room here today that had the right to throw these stones at you? Wasn't there even just one person that would stay here and do that? No, not one. She said, no one, Lord. And Jesus said, well, you got another thing coming, right? Here comes the lecture. Here comes the condemnation. Here comes all the terrible things that you were afraid that God was going to say to you when you're standing in front of him with nothing to hide your sin. What's he say, church? He doesn't say any of those things. He says, I do not condemn you either. From now on, go and sin no more. I think it's important to note here that Jesus doesn't just let her go. He lets her go and lets her change. He gives her an opportunity to turn her life around. He doesn't just say, hey, it's all good, do whatever you want. He says, go and sin no more. He offers her mercy. He offers her grace in this moment, and he offers her an expectation to be transformed by God's grace and by his mercy. It's a very powerful story. It's one that if you were to kind of wander around in the shoes of the Pharisees and the scribes, you might feel a little guilty about the way you've treated some people. Or if you were in her shoes, you might be very aware of how you can feel before God and how other people can make you feel awful and ashamed when you're caught in the very act. You might also be in need of hearing Jesus say something to you that you need to hear desperately in those moments. As I was reflecting on this over the last couple of weeks, I got a few questions that I want to explore with you for just a few moments. Where are you tempted to throw stones the most? Where are you? Now, if you're a Pharisee and a scribe, where are you tempted to throw stones the most? What group of people are you most likely to pick up a stone and think about throwing it, right? What kind of person, what kind of sinner do you know in your life that maybe you think it might be all right once in a while to pick up a stone and throw it at them? Who are those people in your life? There's a guy that wrote a book called Unclean. His name is Richard Beck. He's a former professor at ACU in Abilene, Texas. And in his book Unclean, he makes a point. He's actually a psychologist and a therapist, and he makes this point that we consider people to be unclean when they commit sins that are unfamiliar to us. You understand the premise? People are unclean when they commit sins that are unfamiliar to us. And so if a person, if you have never committed adultery, and you think of someone who has committed adultery, then, well, how do you feel about them? Well, you feel like that person's unclean because they're not like me. But how do you feel about other sins? What about sins that you have committed? What about taking the Lord's name in vain? What about stealing something? What about gossiping? What about treating other people with disregard? What about those sins, which we categorize how? Those are little sins, because my sins that I'm really familiar with, I don't feel that unclean. But those who have committed other sins, what about homosexuality? Or what about people that struggle with sexual sins of a various kind, right? What if we think about them and we put them in a different category because they've done something that we are not okay with, but we're very okay with the sins that we have committed? Do you see the difference that he's trying to make here? What are the sins that you would pick up stones and think that person needs to be stoned? And I think that what we should learn from a story like this is that regardless of what sin you've been caught in, when you're standing in front of Jesus, or when someone is thrown in front of Jesus, you should probably drop the stones, because you are just as guilty as they are, and it doesn't matter which sin you've committed. Every sin causes you to fall short of the glory of God. For the wages of sin, Paul says, is death. For who? The people that did things that I'm okay with, right? Or all the people who have sinned in all the different ways. Sin separates us from God, and God stands in front of sinners and says to them, I don't condemn you, go and sin no more. It's a message that we need to hear today. What about this one? Whose dignity have you failed to protect? Whose dignity have you failed to protect? Maybe I'll say it this way. How have churches failed in this area? You might kind of wait a minute. How have churches failed in this area? You realize that in church communities, when it comes to the problem of sin, we don't get it all right. We make mistakes. We have failed in these areas. And there's a few things that we do as churches that make them failures. For example, we expose people who have sinned in our community through gossip, right? Why do you think that gossip is a sin? It's because it hurts a community. It hurts other people. It takes people and calls them out behind their back in a way that's shameful. And we treat them like they are less than other people when we talk about them behind their back. And whoever them is, when you talk about them, whether you say, God, bless their little heart or whatever it is, right? You say that it makes it okay to gossip, right? Oh, bless their little heart. That's not okay. It's never okay to expose a person and to gossip about them. The Bible condemns that just as much as the sin that they may have committed. Does that make sense to you? That's a way that churches have failed people in this regard. Maybe we've even showed some partiality or some favoritism, or protected some people. What do you do when an elder in the community has sinned? Well, maybe you look the other way. Or what if the preacher has sinned? And you're like, well, he's a pretty good guy otherwise, but, he's got this thing, and you try to protect them. Or what if it's some other kind of leader, and we just like what they do so much that we don't want to call them out, we don't want to confront them, we don't want to talk about the sin that they have in their life. Sometimes we have protected people in the community because we're afraid that exposing them might take something away, or it might be too hard to overcome. The Bible makes it pretty clear, even when an elder sins, you're to go to that elder and hold them accountable. Read your Bibles, church. 1 Timothy chapter 5, you're supposed to call them out. And if they don't respond, what do? You go get some others and you come together and you call them out on that. You want them to repent. You want them to turn around. You can't just turn your head and ignore sin, which may be, and that's the third thing, sometimes in our communities we've done everybody a disservice by ignoring sin in the community. What would happen if you got cancer and you just put a Band-Aid on it? Would that help you? Maybe if you just hide it for a while, it'll be okay. Or what if your check engine light came on your car, and you took a little bit of electrical tape and you covered it over the check engine light? Does it make the problem go away? You know, ignoring sin in the community does not do that. Jesus says a little leaven does something. What does it do, church? It leavens the whole lump. And if you let that go in a community, it's going to have consequences. You're going to have problems that come from that. We need to address it. Now, that means we need to address it in a loving way, in a gracious way, in a way that Jesus would address it. But we still need to address it. We can't ignore it. Maybe sometimes we do with those unclean sins, right? The ones that we think we're not okay with, while we're okay with others. Maybe we label people, or maybe we isolate people, and we don't allow them to do things within the community because of what they've done in the past. Paul, we were talking about this in class this morning, and Josh taught class this morning with the teens. Did a nice job today again. And in Philippians chapter 3, Paul says that he had all of these things, right, that he had taken and accumulated as kind of merits that he could say, here's my resume. I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews, a Pharisee among Pharisees, right? When it comes to righteousness, he's getting it right. You know, he's really good at this. In fact, he says that he's blameless, which doesn't mean that he never sinned. It just means that when it came to the law, he did everything the law required of him when he sinned. What were one of his sins? Remember those sins? He thought he was serving God, but what was he doing? He was going out and collecting Christian people and having them put to death. You think that would stick in your brain a little bit? Because once he encountered Jesus and his life changed, he had to do something that was really hard. He had to forget what lies behind. And he says those very words, forgetting what lies behind, I press on towards the prize. You know, one of the most difficult things about sin in a community is that sometimes the community simply won't let you change. Now, you might change, you might be transformed, but the church community remembers, and they hold you back, and they don't let you move forward. They treat you with suspicion, they treat you with contempt, and they don't let you move forward. And maybe one of the other things, and the last thing that I'll say about this question here is maybe instead of leading the community in a way where we shepherd one another and we teach one another and we encourage one another when someone's caught in a sin, maybe we just do a whole lot of judging. Maybe we do just exactly what these people were starting to do with this woman, and that is grab some stones, make a judgment, and say, Jesus, just say the word, and we'll start throwing stones. They didn't have the right to do that. Jesus did have the right to do that, and he chose not to judge her. He showed her mercy and showed her grace. Another question that came out of my thinking in the last couple of weeks: is there a sin in your life that needs to be exposed? Now, I'm not going to do that with you this morning. I'm not going to throw you out in front of the crowd here and say, this is your sin, it needs to be exposed. But the one person that probably needs to expose the sin more than anybody else is you. It's you. When Jesus says, when people are wanting to follow after Jesus, he says for them to deny themselves, to take up a cross and follow him. Why does he start with denying yourself? Because you are the most likely person to trip up when it comes to following Jesus. You're going to trip over your own sin, and you need to get out of the way so that you can follow the one who is the way. And so, maybe there's some sin in your life that needs to be brought to light. Maybe it needs to be confessed. Maybe it needs to be confronted. Maybe you need to entrust yourself to some people that can hold you accountable and help you walk through that. People who won't judge you with contempt and suspicion forever, but people who will help you, hold you accountable, and help you be transformed more into the likeness of Jesus and shepherd you in the direction of what you need rather than judging you and condemning you and sending you away. Another question: do you believe that Jesus' mercy is stronger than your failure? There are some people who think I've just failed over and over and over again. I've done this so much. It's not the first time that I've been caught in the act. It's not the first time that I've been exposed here. And I continue to go back to that well, and I continue to drink from the well that doesn't ever give me life. I just keep trying to get this water that doesn't fill me up, this sin that keeps me going in the wrong direction. And I keep not drinking from the water that gives eternal life, the living well that wells up within us, who is Jesus. Do you believe that Jesus' mercy is greater than your failure? And I'm just going to say this as a question because it's going to sound like an accusation, and it might be an accusation. Take note, if you're offended by this next question, we probably need to change, okay? And the question is this: what would it look like for our church to be known more for restoration and transformation than for condemnation? What would it be like for us to be a church known more for restoration and for transformation than condemnation. In that story, everybody drops their stones, right? The courtyard becomes quiet. All of the accusers walked away because they knew they had no right to accuse this woman. And only two remained. There was a sinner and there was a Savior. The only one qualified to condemn her in that moment did not condemn her. He chose mercy. But that mercy is not cheap. Grace is not cheap. Mercy is not cheap. It comes at a great expense. And if we were to read to the end of the story, as we get towards the end of the Gospel of John, we're going to get to this. But at the cross, stones are going to be replaced by nails and by wood. At the cross, the sinless one who could judge will be judged for her. The one who says, "Neither do I condemn you," is the one who's going to be condemned to death. That's the core of the gospel. That's the good news about what Jesus does for sinners like you and sinners like me who have been caught in the very act. Jesus does not excuse us. However, Jesus does redeem us. And if you're holding some stones today, what do you think you ought to do with those? Drop them. Let them go. If you are being crushed by shame because of your own sin, what should you do? You should look up to Jesus. His face is not one of condemnation. It's one of love and mercy and grace, and one of expectation. And he will send you away and say for you to go and to sin no more. Let's pray together.